Good afternoon, everybody. This is the Kwasiborski show calling you live and direct from Prague, Prague's Czech Republic, the heart of Central Europe. Very rainy, stormy weekend here in Prague, so time to get back onto the podcast. It's been about 23 days, which is kind of amazing. I was on the last time with Philip Kwasiborski of Prague and also a rabid Philadelphia Eagles fan living here in the Czech Republic from Karlovy Vary and one of the coaches of the Prague Mustangs as we coach a local American football team here. And it's kind of exciting time being here in Prague and looking at today. It's 12 o'clock in the afternoon on lunch on a Saturday afternoon. First of all, before we get started, I'd like to thank Spreaker.com for allowing me to have this platform. I'd like to thank Al Gore for inventing the internet. And I also like to thank you, the loyal listeners, if you actually do listen. As I said, it looks like fall rain is starting to set in here in Prague. It's supposed to rain all day, all night tonight, and probably tomorrow morning. And then the fall temperatures set in. So I know if anyone's listening on the east coast of the United States of America, they're going through yet another heat wave. But here it looks like in Central Europe, at least, that fall is right around the corner. One thing to definitely talk about today is the Philadelphia Eagles, and it's the NFL cutdown day. There's a lot of, it's a very nervous day, a day of trepidation for a lot of players. It's also a very hard day for coaches as they have to tell players who have played their heart out, who will not make the NFL roster, that everything they did in camp, everything the coaches asked of them, but just didn't quite have the talent to make the NFL roster, the active 53-man rosters. Rosters have to be down to 53 players today by 4 p.m. And as a Philadelphia Eagles fan, I have to say this is one of the most drama-free camps that we've experienced in a very, very long time. I mean, outside of the nagging questions about Carson Wentz's knees, is who's going to be the fourth or fifth string running back? What's going to happen to Alshon Jeffrey? Is he going to start the season on the PUP list? Is he going to be deactivated for 6 games, or is he only going to miss a few games? Who's the backup, the offensive lineman? Who's going to be the backup cornerbacks, backup safeties? Who's going to be in the linebacker positions at the backup? It's all talking about backups. And for once, we have this luxury of just really not having too many position camp drama battles in the preseason, which is very reassuring, and it also tells you the talent level and the depth level of the Philadelphia Eagles team put together by the Eagles Brain Trust and Executive Vice President Howie Roman, and also his number one assistant, Joe Douglas, who is probably on the hot list to be the next GM to run an NFL franchise, and I'm sure the Eagles will do everything they can to retain Joe Douglas heading into next offseason. But going into the NFL season, let's look at today. It looks like basically the biggest drama on the team is at running back. Who's going to be the fourth or fifth running back? Who's going to make the offensive line? And who will be starting at the linebacker position and also maybe at the cornerback position? Who's going to be the slot cornerbacks? So heading into today's cutdown day, I think it's safe to say we know who the 3 quarterbacks will be. It will be the franchise player in Carson Wentz, Super Bowl MVP Nick Foles, and Nate Sudfeld, a guy who really stepped up his game this preseason to show that he can play at the NFL level. At the wide receiver position, it looks like Sheldon Gibson has really earned a roster spot this year. He will move up the depth charts eventually as well. And here was a guy who was a 5th-round draft pick last year in 2017, was hurt most of training camp last year. Made a couple spots, I don't say spot stars, but played sparingly, especially on special teams for the Eagles last year, and came into training camp really on the bubble. But he had a monster preseason. He showed how reliable he could be. He was Nate Sudfeld's favorite target all preseason and really earned himself a roster spot. And I think it goes to show that people do deserve second chances in this world where we live in, do for me now, or we move on. Sheldon Gibson was given a chance to prove that he could play with the Eagles and in the NFL, and he's going to make the roster. And I think he's going to be coming the 4th wide receiver off the bench. I think you'll see Alshon Jeffrey, obviously, will be one of the starters along with Mike Wallace, the fast, speedy veteran on the outside, with Nelson Aguilar returning to a spot position where he shined very much and resurrected his career last year by going to the slot receiver. You also have Mac Hollins, the special teammate, who's been battling a bit of an injury. He hasn't really played much since the first preseason game, and we're going to see what his status is going in, which leaves Sheldon Gibson a chance to step into Mac Hollins' role. But you also have the former Steeler Marcus Wheaton, who looks like he's played himself onto the preseason based upon his NFL experience. And then you have, as aforementioned, Sheldon Gibson, but also the camp, star of the camp towards the end, DeAndre Carter, the speedy wide receiver. And looking at him in a preseason film, he is very fast. He's reliable and can catch the ball. And I would hopefully, the spot I think will come down to DeAndre Carter and then Marcus Wheaton. I think Wheaton will make the active roster basically because he has experience playing at the NFL level. And also with the injury to Matt Collins, they really can't afford to put DeAndre Carter into that starting 53-man roster right now. And hopefully they can stash him away on the practice squad. Running back, also down to the fourth or fifth running back, you have your starters in Jay Ajayi, Corey Clement, and Darren Sproles. Darren Sproles' role will be interesting to see what they do with him this year, if he will be mainly a third down back, or will he just be a punt returner. And I think he's a future Hall of Famer, especially with all the punt return yards and kickoff return yards he's amassed. It's been a great, great weapon out of the backfield. But the use of third down backs has been quite dropping off a bit. The New England Patriots still sort of use the third down back option. But what happens if you have just a third down back and say in Darren Sproles, that when he's on the field, you pretty much know they're going to try to get him the ball. And I think defense is key into that. I think the New Orleans Saints and the Eagles did a great job last year. The Saints with Alvin Kamara and Mark Ingram. Kamara really stepped up and showed he's going to be an NFL star. But in the beginning, he was just a third down back, so teams could really key on him. So they could use the split backfield with Ingram and Alvin Kamara. And the Eagles did a great job with Jay Ajayi, Corey Clement, and also LeGarrette Blount. But you also have the veteran Wendell Smallwood playing for a spot. You have the local kid, Josh Adams, looking for a spot. And you also have the much maligned fourth-round draft pick, also of 2017, Donald Pumphrey, also looking for a spot. It'll be quite interesting to see what it comes down to. Again, I think the Eagles go with the experience here at the position, and I think Wendell Smallwood winds up getting the spot. I think the local kid, Josh Adams, has a shot to make the practice squad. But I also think they keep Pumphrey, or they try to put Pumphrey on the practice squad if they're going to keep five down backs. I don't think the Eagles want to show that Pumphrey was a wasted pick. And I was watching the awful preseason game against the Jets, or rewatching it, I should say, on the NFL Game Pass here in Europe. And he looked fairly well getting the chance when he had to make plays. He's fast. He caught the ball out of the backfield, and he did what he was supposed to do. He was pretty much a check down option for the awful Christian Hackenberg, and then the fourth round quarterback string Joe Callahan. But if I had to take your chances, I think if you don't want to lose one of those players, you cut Josh Adams, put him on the practice squad, and keep Pumphrey as a chance to be the fourth down back. Probably the greatest story coming out of training camp is the backup offensive lineman Jordan Mailata. Jordan Mailata is from Australia. He was an Australian rugby player, and he was drafted in the 7th round by the Philadelphia Eagles. The man is about 6'8", weighs roughly 370 pounds. You'll have to do the kilograms, divide 2.2, and then you'll get your kilogram measure there if you're a fan of the kilograms in the metric system. And the Eagles actually traded up in the 7th round to draft this guy. He had never, ever played American football until he went to his first mini camp with the Philadelphia Eagles. He has been playing the backup left tackle position as Jason Peters, pretty much the next Hall of Famer on the Philadelphia Eagles, sat out all of preseason rehabbing his knees. And Halapute Vaitai, the 5th round draft pick from the Carson Wentz draft a couple of years ago, 2016, has pretty much played the starting right tackle spot this preseason. Has looked very shaky when he has played, which he's a former 5th round pick. Even though he played very well in the season last year, he's really struggled this preseason. But Mailata is a guy who's played himself onto a roster spot. It is no longer a chance for him to be stashed on the practice squad because the Eagles are going to lose him, as Mailata has done nothing but improve his game the entire preseason. And now it looks like he could be. Some NFL analysts, especially Ross Tucker, said that not only will Mailata make the roster, be a starting left tackle, he will be the heir apparent to Jason Peters at the tackle position. And what a find. If this guy does pan out to everything they say he can be, he will be in his potential. What a find by Howie Roseman and Joe Douglas, looking all around, all scouring the globe for the next great potential Philadelphia Eagle. And when you're the Super Bowl defending Super Bowl champions, you have roster depth, what the Eagles have, and I think that's their biggest strength as the defending Super Bowl champions is the roster depth. You can take chances in the seventh round on an Australian rugby player that's never played it down never played American football in his life, and hopefully he pans out this way because you don't know how much Peters has left in the tank. You don't know if Peters is going to make it even through the season, and if he's going to be the same player, or if he's going to be starting to slow down. He looked like he was slowing down under Chip Kelly, but raised his game under Doug Peterson and has still played at the Hall of Fame level. But the Mulata, he's going to make the team, probably at the expense of the former first-round bust Chase Warmack, a guy that I was hoping that could really resurrect his career coming into the Eagles last year, especially since the left guard position was pretty much an unknown. And the journeyman Steve Wisniewski held down that spot. And even though Wisniewski's not really a true guard, he played his butt off last year and stayed relatively healthy, and that's also the key coming into the season. But the great story out of training camp is Jordan Malatia, and all the power to him, and we wish him the best in the NFL. And he's not a guy who the Eagles can afford to stash on the practice squad, but he's someone that will be a player, and he could see significant time, especially if Peters goes down with a significant injury and Vaitai comes in and is ineffective as he was in the preseason. The rest of the offensive line, there's a sixth-round draft pick this year named Matt Pryor who will probably play his way onto the roster. So we'll see how he makes it this year. And one thing about the offensive line of the Eagles, they're just getting a little bit older. We talked about Peters, who's about 36. Wisniewski's around 30. Jason Kelsey is around 32, 33, and he got injured his back in the second preseason game against the Patriots. Brandon Brooks is at around 29, and Lane Johnson is entering in, I think, to his prime, and he's considered the best right tackle in football when he's not juicing or being suspended. So the line's health is a little bit of a situation for the Eagles, but they seem to have great depth, and they've seemed to, I would have to say it's a miracle the way they've pretty much reinforced the offensive line. It was a position where Chip Kelly would ignore in the draft, except for his first draft pick. He took Lane Johnson, but that was the consensus. They needed help at the right tackle position, and he was the best tackle on the board at the fourth overall pick. But he never drafted an offensive lineman after that. And it started to show in Chip Kelly's last season with the Eagles. The line just wasn't that great. And Howie Roseman and Joe Douglas reinforced the offensive line through the draft with Sayamalu, who's been very versatile. And even though he struggled in the preseason, he's pretty much the guy who backs up the center of the guards and hopefully, at the worst case scenario, the right tackle position. Hopefully that won't happen. But he's a guy that the Eagles drafted along with Vaitai in that Carson Wentz draft. And that draft is turning out, if Sayamalu can be an effective backup, Vaitai already has shown won a Super Bowl as a starting left tackle. And they also drafted Jordan Mills, who's the starting cornerback on the outside. That draft is turning out to be the best Eagles draft, I would have to say, since 2012 when the Eagles got Fletcher Cox et al. Out of that position. But again, that's just a little bit of concern on the offensive line. I think the receiver position we talked about already, and I think that Marcus Wheaton makes there. The tight end position's a little bit shaky for me. You have Zach Ertz, who's, I think, in the top five at worst tight ends in the league, probably top three. He's going to be backed up by the Eagles' second-round draft pick, Dallas Goedert, who was the Eagles' first draft pick this year. And remember the story of Dallas. The NFL draft was held in Dallas. The Dallas Cowboys were targeting Dallas Goedert because their Hall of Fame tight end Jason Witten announced his retirement. The Eagles traded over Dallas to draft Dallas in Dallas. It's one of the best stories of the draft that pretty much goes not really talked about this year. But the third tight end is Richard Rodgers, who replaces the now departed and Philly special Super Bowl hero Trey Burton. And Richard Rodgers, they're not really telling you what's wrong with him, but he has not been able to play much in the preseason, I think, if not at all, and his knee is still a major issue, which I think at the Eagles' position at tight end, it's weakened from last year. You know, you lose all Eagle tight end Brett Selleck, and then you lose also Trey Burton, who's a great story as well, who went from an undrafted draft pick out of the University of Florida to becoming the starting tight end of the Chicago Bears this year and is expected to contribute mightily to the Chicago Bears offense this year. But I think backup tight end is a situation. Zach Ertz is not someone, he plays about 14 games a year. He usually suffers an injury here or there, and the tight end position is going to take that. It's a position where the guys go over the middle and they take big hits sometimes. And I know Ertz has had a few concussions in his day, some hamstring injuries. In the preseason, Ertz has looked great, obviously. Dallas Goedert, though, does look like worthy of that 49th overall pick. And it'll be very, very interesting, and hopefully Doug Peterson will take some playbooks and put the two tight end sets out there. If you put Ertz and Goddard on the field at the same time, a la the way the Patriots used to use Rob Gronkowski and the now departed Aaron Hernandez, it could, with the wide receivers that we have, this offense could be potent once again. Because I expect Aguilar to pick up where he was last year. I expect Alshon Jeffrey, when he turns to the field, to actually be a better contributor in the regular season this year, stats-wise. It took him a while to get unleashed or uncouth with Carson Wentz last year, but once they started clicking, man, they started clicking. And to me, Alshon Jeffrey is the key to the entire offense besides Carson Wentz. But even when Carson Wentz is in there, I would say that Alshon Jeffrey is the second most valuable offensive player, sans the offensive line. Skill position, I would have to say, would be Alshon Jeffrey. The other wide receiver position, you have a speedster in Mike Wallace, who was picked up as a free agent after the Eagles traded Torrey Smith to the Carolina Panthers. I think Wallace is an upgrade in that position. Torrey Smith even said while he had the speed, he just did not have the year that you wanted last year, although he made some huge catches in the playoffs, especially against the Vikings. I expect Mike Wallace to come in and actually be a slight upgrade at that position. The journeyman wide receiver who is a speedster and should have a chance to really break out this year. So the Eagles have understood the value of having a speedy wide receiver and a wide receiver in Alshon Jeffrey, who's the number one target. And Alshon, to me, is my favorite player on the Eagles, to be honest. We all love Carson Wentz. I love Carson Wentz as well. But to me, like I said, Jeffrey is a guy, every time he's on the field, defenses have to step up. And they have to make sure they know where Alshon Jeffrey is at all times. The Eagles have not had a complete receiver like this since T.O. I'm not saying Jeffrey's in the class of T.O., but like I said, every time T.O. was on the field, you had to account for him. Deshaun Jackson was a guy who you had to account for him every time he was on the field, but he wasn't as complete as a receiver just due to his size. He was all hit or all miss, kind of like the Rob Deere of the NFL. He either hit a lot of home runs or he wasn't visible at all on the field. And Deshaun Jackson wasn't a threat to go over the middle, much like Alshon will do for the Eagles. So the offense seems set. I have a lot of faith in the offense. And obviously the biggest question this week going into Thursday night's matchup is, will Carson Wentz play? When Carson Wentz tore his ACL and his MCL, two massive ligaments in his knee. It's not the standard ACL injury. He vowed to be back for day one. He has not played in the preseason, and rightfully so. He started out training camp in normal first-team drills, then was rested for about 3 weeks because it was very vague about why he didn't practice for 3 weeks. I guess the coaches and trainers didn't like something. The rumor was that they were in a pass-rushing drill. He was about to get nailed. Although you really don't tackle the quarterbacks, he was about to get hit, and might have tweaked the knee a little bit. Look, I'm going to tell you this. Like, Carson Wentz is in RG3 territory. He has not played a snap in the preseason. RG3 is the former franchise quarterback for the Washington Redskins, obviously a very short-lived franchise quarterback of the Washington Redskins. And the story goes, in the rookie year, much like Carson Wentz, RG3 hurt his knee in his rookie year, re-aggravated it in the playoff game against Seattle. I believe it was Seattle or Denver. Mike Shanahan, then the coach of the Washington Redskins, opted to keep RG3 in, even if I don't know the situation, but he kept RG3 in, and RG3 just never was the same player. He may have tore the knee up even more in that game, and he's been a journeyman quarterback, hopefully resurrecting his career at the Baltimore Ravens, and hoping to make that team as the second or third string quarterback. Most likely the third string, because the Ravens have Joe Flacco, their longtime starter and Super Bowl champion. They drafted and kind of traded up to draft Lamar Jackson out of Louisville. And then RG3 might make the team as a third-string quarterback. Anyway, long story short, Carson Wentz has had injury issues. He's only played one full season of football in the last 4 years, and that goes back to college, where he had wrist issues. After his rookie year with the Philadelphia Eagles, he had some elbow issues from all the throws that he made and some shoulder issues. Elbows often lead to shoulders, shoulders to elbows, and then he tears up his knee. The Eagles have to treat him like the 76ers, the Philadelphia 76ers, the NBA basketball team, treated Joel Embiid. They have to make sure that he's ready to go when he steps onto the field, that he is ready to play. Look, when he steps onto the field, he's got to rebuild confidence in that knee. He's got to be strong enough. He's got to take a few hits to make sure he knows that the knee can take the hits. And we have to see if structurally and physically if the knee can survive taking NFL hits. You do that basically by getting as many reps in practice as possible, many game situations, but there's nothing, and it's anything in life, there's nothing like playing the actual game. It's like if you're an actor or an actress, you can rehearse all you want, but there's nothing like when the lights go on. Are you going to perform as well as you did in rehearsal? Are you going to be better or are you going to be worse? Hopefully that you're better. And that's what we're hoping that Carson Wentz will be this year. Looking at the Eagles' schedule, they have a very difficult matchup off the revenge-minded Atlanta Falcons opening the NFL season on Thursday night. For me, it'll be 2:30 in the morning Friday morning, but definitely will be staying up to watch the game, or at least wake up to watch the game here in Prague, as I always do. But then you look at their schedule after that. They go to the much-maligned Tampa Bay Bucks after that. Then they have the Tennessee Titans on the road. And let me just pull up their schedule real quick. And then the fourth game, I think, is also a winnable game as well. Just want to pull it up. And I think the first four games is where you really, so Eagles, Falcons, the Colts are the third game, then the Titans are the fourth game. So the Falcons obviously are going to be the biggest test going into opening season. They have much revenge on their minds. I think they feel that they should have won that game against the Philadelphia Eagles, the opening, there's a divisional round. The Falcons came into the Lincoln Financial Field as the favorites, the first time ever a 6 seed, because they had beaten the New Orleans Saints. A 6 seed was scheduled to beat were scheduled to be the favorites against the number 1 seed. And the first time a number 1 seed in the NFL was considered underdog going into the first round of the playoffs at home. The score was 15-10. That was a very ugly first quarter for Nick Foles, the Super Bowl MVP, but then he regained his form and played very, very well down in the entire game, Nick Foles. But the game came down to the Falcons at 4th and 2, or 4th and goal at the time. They pretty much had to go for the goal at the end of the game. Matt Ryan rolls out to the pockets under pressure, throws a great ball to Julio Jones, and Julio Jones, the ball goes right through his hands. The only reason I think it went through Julio Jones' hands is because he slipped to the ground before the pass, and then when he got up, he had to jump right away, and it was too much of an adjustment for even the great Julio Jones to make. So they catch that ball, though. The Falcons they're up 17, probably 18-15 with not much time on the clock, and they probably win that game and beat the Eagles. Alas, they didn't, as we all know the story goes, but I'm saying the Atlanta Falcons definitely have revenge on their minds. The next game against Tampa Bay, we have the Tampa Bay Bucks down in Tampa the next week. I think that's an easy win for the Eagles. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers are a mess. They will have Ryan Fitzpatrick in there, the much maligned, the much well-traveled veteran out of Harvard, goes up against the Eagles. I think the Buccaneers are the worst team in a very strong division. Then the Eagles play the Colts in Indianapolis. That will be a fun game to watch. As you see Andrew Luck coming back for the Colts, it looks like his shoulder is healthy. I just don't see the Colts defense being able to stop the Eagles offense, especially on the turf. And then the Titans. The Eagles look like they're on the road for 3 out of the first 4 games. Go into Tennessee, which they're an up-and-down team with a new coach, Rob Vrabel. Vrabel of the New England Patriots, won a few Super Bowls with them. He is a new head coach, and he'll have that team fired up. I just don't see Marcus Mariota, who's right now his career is with Jameis Winston, kind of hanging in the balance. Tennessee has to make a decision on him. Is he going to be the long-term quarterback, or is he just someone that's mediocre? Mariota had a great preseason when he single-handedly defeated the Denver Broncos in Denver this past year, in the playoffs, putting that team on his back and showing that he can be a franchise quarterback, but we will see if he can do that. And that heads into the Week 5 matchup against the Vikings, who will also come back into Lincoln Financial Field and will have sweet revenge on their mind as well. But let's go back to the Falcons game. Listening to Philadelphia Eagles radio sports, I'm sorry, not Philadelphia Eagles, but Philadelphia Sports Talk Radio, the big question is Nick Foles, who has looked shaky at best, was called out by his head coach on national TV, who said he was very disappointed in Doug Peterson, was very disappointed in Nick Foles' performance against the Cleveland Browns in the third preseason game, which is the final tune-up for your starters going into the first game. Usually the fourth game is always regulated to guys trying to make the team as backups. As we said, the guys who are trying to make the cut, their last chance to really shine. I think one thing that's not being talked about is the Eagles' defense versus the Falcons' offense. Nick Foles is a very up and down quarterback. He's a backup quarterback. He's up and down. This preseason, he's playing with his basically pretty much playing with. Sorry, I keep saying the word playing. He's playing with a ton of second string players. He barely had Jay Ajayi much in there, the starting running back, or Corey Clement. He didn't have Alshon Jeffrey. They didn't really use Marcus Wheaton while he was in the game. They used a little bit of Mike Wallace here and there. But what I'm trying to say is that basically he was playing with the second team the entire time, and he was under pressure. I feel like all the snaps that I watched, he was under pressure. When he did have time in the pocket, like any quarterback, he looked fine. He looked rested. He looked confident, I should say, not rested. The Eagles do not show their offensive playbook, and we also know that Nick Foles is a rhythm quarterback. He's got to be, like any quarterback, he's got to be in a rhythm. But when it says that he's not a guy who's going to put a team on his back the entire time, I think he put the team on his back during the Super Bowl a bit, for the most of the Super Bowl, against the New England Patriots. But he's still a backup quarterback who needs that rhythm. He needs that time. He caught lightning in a bottle during the playoffs. But the thing that I noticed about Nick Foles, when Nick Foles first was with the Eagles, drafted by Reed, and then when Chip Kelly put him in, we all know about his miraculous season where he threw 29 touchdowns, 2 in the playoffs with 2 interceptions. He was a very confident guy. But as the season wore on and the games meant more, he seemed a little timid in those games. In the playoff game, even though he left the field with the lead, he was very safe in his choices. The next year, the Eagles opened up against the Jacksonville Jaguars. And needless to say, the Jaguars put relentless pressure on him, and he was not expecting that. And he had what's called in the NFL happy feet, where you're thinking about getting hit before you actually make the actual play. I thought he lost a lot of confidence. I thought he was always thinking about the hit against the Redskins. I think the third or fourth game he took a massive hit. It was never really the same quarterback in the second year. It seemed like he was always thinking about the pass rush. As he's resurrected his career with the Eagles after a horrible stint in St. Louis, after going to Kansas City with Andy Reid contemplating retirement, he comes in last year against the Los Angeles Rams when Carson Wentz goes down. He looked very confident. He looked very confident against the Giants. In the last 2 regular season games against the Raiders and against the Cowboys, he looked awful. He looked so awful in those games that the Eagles fans were calling for Nate Sudfeld to start the very first preseason game. And that's what's happening again. Eagle fans are having the memories of the Raiders game that pretty much meant nothing to the Eagles, even though they won 19-9 on a very cold, windy Christmas night in Philadelphia. And then the Dallas Cowboys game where Nick Foles played maybe a series or two, probably would have won the game if Torrey Smith hung on to the ball. And then comes into the playoff and looked absolutely horrible and faces a lot of criticism and a lot of controversy going into the playoffs. Obviously, Doug Peterson doesn't care about what Eagles fans really think because what coach really does in terms of making roster decisions. And against the Falcons, he started out in the playoff game very timid. It looked very kind of shy in the first quarter, but then picked it up in the second quarter and the rest of the game. He looked very, very sharp after that, and his stats in the playoffs were on a historical level last year, to be quite honest. I don't worry about Nick Foles. I think he's going to practice very, very hard this week. I think he knows now that the Super Bowl season's over. He's been called out by his head coach, Doug Peterson. And, I'm sure he hears the things that people think the Falcons are going to win because Matt Ryan's a better quarterback. A lot of times now, NFL teams or NFL Monday morning quarterbacks are looking at fantasy points. They see Matt Ryan versus Nick Foles, and even though those two don't play each other, they think Matt Ryan, who's the better quarterback, will win the matchup. Of course, any day of the week, you're going to take Matt Ryan over Nick Foles. But at the same time, the one thing that the Eagles fans are not anticipating is the strength of this team, which is the defense. And this defense is arguably better much deeper, especially in the secondary, the cornerback position, and the defensive line than it was last year. There's major worries about the the linebacker position, and we'll get there in a second about that when we talk about the defensive depth. But going up against the Atlanta Falcons offense, I will take this Eagles defense over the Falcons defense versus Nick Foles. I just will. The Eagles defense is going to be swarming, is going to be crazy in Philadelphia Thursday night, and that defense is going to come out. They're going to want to set the tone. The Falcons' offensive line pretty much will make some adjustments against what the Eagles did in the playoffs, but it's not. I don't think it's going to be enough. I think the Eagles' cornerbacks will be a lot better in the situations. They're a lot deeper. I think the linebackers, they're going to have some issues there, but I really think that the Eagles' defensive line will dictate this game, and the Eagles will win their opening season game. I just can't imagine. I can't imagine the Atlanta Falcons coming in and winning. Maybe on a last-second field goal, it's Nick Foles looks ineffective or inconsistent. That's the one thing you got to worry about. But I just think this Eagles defense, and no one's talking about them because it's almost expected. But we got to remember that this Eagles defense was number 1 in the league last year against the run. Number 1 in the league against the run, which meant teams oftentimes had to throw against the Eagles. And in the last podcast, which you may or may not have listened to 23 days ago, the one thing that even though the Eagles gave up a lot of catches and a lot of yards, most of the times those yards given up, they were stopped right there. The yards after the catch were very limited, and the Eagles secondary and also linebackers and pass coverage skills did a tremendous job of stopping teams from getting that first down. Long time, my major Eagles complained against the defense. If it was 3rd and 6, 7, 8, or 9, the other team would get the first down. This year, when it was 3rd, 6, 7, 8, or 9, the team was falling a yard or two short. The Eagles secondary and the linebackers and pass coverage knew how to stop those teams before the first down marker, and I think you're going to see the same thing again this year. I think Eagles fans, of course, watching Nick Foles' preseason, you have to be a little bit concerned, but he's not the key to the game. The Eagles defense, the Eagles front four is going to be the key to the game going into that Thursday night matchup. And that's what I see. I see the Eagles pretty much, maybe I'm still on the high of the football, the Super Bowl season, which I probably am, but I just look at these first 4 games, and I think they're all easy, winnable games. And then I see Carson Wentz maybe coming back in week 5 or week 6 against the Giants. I think I would pretty much put him in against the Giants and rest on the first 5 games. And if the Eagles are 4-1 or 3-2, I expect them to be no worse than 3-2 going into that Giants game. Which I believe is on a Thursday night as well. That game there will be a big test. It'll be the first divisional game and really the third conference game for the Eagles. I think that's where Carson Wentz comes back if he's really fully healthy. I think that Vikings defense is going to be very tough, very difficult to play against. To be his very first action in the game. The other thing, he could be back against week 3 against the Tennessee Titans. But I hold out Carson Wentz as long as possible. And if he has to come back on that Giants game, I have no problem with that. Looking into the defense, we didn't even go through the defensive alignments because there really isn't much to talk about on the depth chart on defense. The only thing that kind of worries me is Michael Bennett and Timmy Jerrigan. Those are 2 guys. Michael Bennett, we acquired from the Seattle Seahawks for a draft pick. Very successful pass rusher, very outspoken. I think he's going to be a dominant force if he's with the team the whole year. No one's talking about his arraignment in September the 18th down in Houston, where he's been late charges were filed against him that he assaulted an older woman in a wheelchair coming out of the tunnel or something in the Super Bowl when the Super Bowl was in Houston. I don't really remember the specifics of it, but he's under indictment or he's going to be arraigned, and he's been charged with this. So it'll be quite interesting to see what comes out of there. And Timmy Jerrigan, I would have to say a very solid nose tackle, definitely better than Benny Logan was for the Eagles, but a guy who hurt his neck in the offseason, and he was inconsistent toward down the stretch last year. He seemed to wear it down anyway, especially with his style of play. So he's a concern going into the season. He's ruptured a disc in his neck, and myself, who's had 2 back surgeries for the same disc, they're not easy to come back from, especially a sport like football where his head is smashing into powerful offensive linemen. It might be difficult for him to be an effective player again. He's backed up by the longtime veteran Haloti Ngata, who the Eagles picked up in the offseason as well to provide some depth. Ngata looked very, very good in the last preseason game against the Browns, as the whole entire defense did. But he's also always got a lot of wear and tear, and we'll see if he's able to hold up for the entire season if Jerrigan can't go. Nigel Bradham looks very strong in the preseason, but is suspended against the Atlanta Falcons, so that puts Jordan Hicks. You have to look at Nathan Gary and either Camille Gruger-Hill, Joe Walker, or Leroy Reynolds are your starting linebackers. And I worry about Hicks. I worry about him a lot. I think a lot of Eagles fans share the same situation about Jordan Hicks. Can he stay healthy the entire year? He hasn't proven to be able to do so, but when he is productive, he is a beast out there for the Eagles at the middle linebacker positions. The Falcons, no doubt, will try to explore the weakness in the linebacker position against the Eagles on opening night on Thursday night. Heading into the cornerback position, you have the starting quarterbacks. Mills will hold down his spot. You have Ronald Darby, who will be opposite him on the outside, and Darby has had a fantastic preseason going into his free agent walk year. The real question is who's going to play the slot cornerback. Will it be Sidney Jones, the injured yet highly talented cornerback out of Washington, who was the Eagles' second-round draft pick in 2017? Will he be able to beat out, let's see, Avonte Maddox or Devontae Busby for that slot position? Right now they say Avonte Maddox is pushing Sidney Jones to be the slot cornerback, and let's face it, the slot cornerback now in the NFL is almost a specialty position. If you have a shutdown cornerback that can really handle the slot, you have a great chance to win the game. And Patrick Robinson last year provided that for the Eagles. He was fantastic as the slot cornerback last year. And a guy who also resurrected his career with the Eagles and turned it into a major free agent signing with the New Orleans Saints. And you almost have to look at the slot cornerback position almost as a specialty left-handed reliever in baseball, sort of like an Andrew Miller type who can just come out of the bullpen and dominate left-handed hitters, but also dominate other hitters and kind of be that shutdown sort of a specialty. As I said, it's a special position, and we'll see what happens. That's a bit of a concern. And the other concern that I have on the safety position, not with the starters Jenkins and McLeod, but just the fact that there's the backup is Corey Graham, a guy who's great backup, but not a guy you want to count on for multiple starts in a season. He's good for a spot start here or there, I'm sure, if the Eagles have to rely on them. And I do worry about Malcolm Jenkins. He's played a lot of football over his career, won 2 Super Bowls, great, fantastic leader. But you start to worry if something happens to him, and I think he's the leader of that defense, that's going to be a huge, huge role for them to fill if something does happen to them. And there is a great safety out there that is not being signed at all, and that's Eric Reed, formerly of the San Francisco 49ers, who, along with Colin Kaepernick, there's a lot of rumors that they have been sort of blackballed from the NFL due to their stances on the NFL anthem. And I think it's really a shame that someone like Kaepernick and Reed are being sort of shunned by the NFL in terms of what they stand for. I'm not going to go into how I feel about the protest of the anthems. I think for the anthem you should stand. The protest can be raising a fist or interlocking arms and things like that. Kneeling for the anthem, it's causing too much controversy on levels where it really doesn't necessarily have to be a controversial position. It's just that the President of the United States wants it to be a controversial position, and it's blowing up so much so that the Dolphins released a handbook. Let's say human resources guys that players can be suspended if they kneel for the anthem. People that support the protest say they're doing it against the social injustices in the United States. People that support the anthem say, protest on your own time, not company's time, because these are athletes playing for someone, and this isn't if they were protesting at their own workspace, they wouldn't be allowed. Be that as it may, I do think it'll be very, very interesting to see if something happens to Malcolm Jenkins. Will Jeffrey Lurie, a guy who's the one NFL owner who took the chance on Michael Vick when he was released from prison for 23 years for an actually convicted crime, took a chance on Michael Vick, resurrected Michael Vick's career, and pretty much saved Michael Vick in very many ways. And Jeffrey Lurie's political view of the world is definitely not in line with President Trump's. You'll see if he will take a chance on Eric Reed if something happens to Jenkins, and if Eric Reed is still available. Eric Reed was a very competent safety. The other thing, too, is Eric Reid may not fit the scheme of the Philadelphia Eagles. I don't know that much about Eric Reid in terms of the way his style of play, but he definitely has the talent to play in the NFL, and something's obviously happening to him. And also, I think Colin Kaepernick, to an extent, Kaepernick as a quarterback, yes, he got the San Francisco 49ers to the Super Bowl. But I saw a guy who just never could adapt his game really to the NFL level on a consistent basis. The one coach that he was supposed to thrive under was Chip Kelly, and he didn't for whatever reason, maybe just because the San Francisco 49ers under Chip Kelly, the talent dearth was very obvious. But for some reason, Kaepernick never really evolved his game in a way to the sense of, he reminds me a lot of a poor man's Cam Newton, where he's not as talented as Newton, but has the same style with the strong arms, kind of the same trajectory on their passes, kind of short laser-like passes, and obviously he has the foot speed. And I just don't think at his age he can come back to the NFL and be a franchise quarterback. But the one reason where I think he was being a bit where he was being blackballed is when the Houston Texans last year lost their looks like their new franchise quarterback in Deshaun Watson to an injury, and the owner, who was a pro-Trump guy, would rather have gone to the rest of the season with Tom Savage and A.J. Yaton or whoever else they had under center rather than sign Colin Kaepernick. Because when Deshaun Watson went down at the time, the Houston Texans looked like they could be contenders not only for the division that year. So that to me showed that the NFL, there's definitely some sort of underlying understanding that Colin Kaepernick is not to be on an NFL roster again. So that's my stance on that, going through the Eagles defense. And another guy who's been a kind of a nice surprise, it looks like the punter, Cameron Johnston, taking over for probably the greatest Eagles punter in history, Doug Longball Jones, came in. He was having Johnston as another Australian kicker, rugby. I don't know, Australian rules football, I think he came from. He had a very tough camp, but he looked really, really good in the games. He just needs to work on his directional, I don't say directional punting, but also field position punting. He seemed to boom a lot. Punts that went for touchbacks that looked like if he just took a shade off of them, they could have bounced around the 1 or the 2 or the 5 or got the team inside the 20. So he's definitely going to be someone to worry about and going into the season. Like I said, I say the Eagles at the very worst should be 3-2 heading into that Giants team. The only teams that could beat them, I think, obviously are the Atlanta Falcons on opening night, and maybe the Tennessee Titans giving them a run for their money because you have the coach down there who might be able to understand how to defend against the Eagles' offense. Am I worried about Nick Foles? I'm more concerned with Carson Wentz's long-term health than I am with Nick Foles as the Eagles' starting quarterback. Look, if Wentz somehow doesn't play the entire season, let's just say he plays one game, comes back in week 4, week 5, whenever, and kind of tweaks the knee, and the Eagles say, look, we're just going to hold him out. Let's get this thing really healthy. I do not think the Eagles will miss the playoffs because they have Nick Foles as the starting quarterback, or even Nate Sudfeld at this point. I have a lot of confidence looking at Sudfeld in the preseason that he could step in and be a spot starter too. Of course, then if Nick Foles gets hurt and Wentz is out for the season, then I think the Eagles will be struggling at the quarterback position. But you never know until they get in there. No one would ever thought that Nick Foles would lead us to the Super Bowl, let alone win the Super Bowl against the New England Patriots and Tom Brady, who put up 505 yards. It's going to be a tremendous season, very exciting season to be an Eagles fan. And then we're going to look a little bit at some of the news heading into Cutdown Day. The biggest story around the league is John Gruden going into Oakland, becoming the head coach and really putting in his John Gruden-esque stamp on the team. And right now, the Oakland Raiders are seriously contemplating trading one of the best defensive players in football, in Khalil Mack, who's entering in the prime of his career, who's due for a very massive long-term extension, along with Derek Carr, the quarterback. And actually, I want to see if Derek Carr's, if he's up for Derek Carr, Khalil Mack. But long story short is that they are now offering him around the league for basically reasons being are unknown. The reasons being that John Gruden is not happy with him holding out. They look like they are understanding what he brings to the team, but they don't want him there. He signed a 4-year, $18 million contract. An average salary of $4 million. Sorry, I just want to look at what's going on with his contract. Maybe I should have done the research, but it looks like he's at the end of his rookie contract. He's due. The cap hits $13.8 million this year, but he becomes an unrestricted free agent next year. So it looked like his contract really ballooned towards the years. His cap hit from his rookie contract from $3.4 million to $4.3 million to $5.1 million to $6 million last year to now $13 million. So, and the dead cap space is $13.846 million if they do cut him, which they won't. Just what is John Gruden doing? You got one of the premier defensive players. Not only is the best defensive player on your team, he's one of the best defensive players in the football. Former defensive player of the year for the Oakland Raiders 2 years ago, either 2017 or 16. And the idea that they want to trade him is absolutely ridiculous. The Green Bay Packers are thinking about trading from the Cleveland Browns, who I swear to God, if they do trade Khalil Mack, it's to the Cleveland Browns. Not so much that don't want to see Khalil Mack in Green Bay. I would love to see the Browns have Myles Garrett. Looks like he's going to be a beast, and Khalil Mack on the defensive line. That could be very, very scary for that division, and a division that doesn't really have a dominant quarterback. You have Andy Dalton of Cincinnati Bengals. You have Ben Roethlisberger, who looks like he's at the end of his career with the Pittsburgh Steelers, and you have Joe Flacco, who also looks like he's at the end of his Ravens career. That could be a very special thing if the Browns are able to land him. But reading one of the funny tweets today as I woke up here was by a radio producer for Philadelphia Fanatic 97.5. The Fanatic, Pat Egan, he just quoted Jason Bateman from Dodgeball. Well, it's a bold strategy right there. It looks like a bold strategy right there, Cotton. If they do trade Khalil Mack, I don't know, again, if Gruden's ego is just obviously that out of control that he's willing to do this, or he's trying to put, a scare into Khalil Mack, like, you need to come into camp, you need to play. We want you to play, but no one's above the team except John Gruden because he's the head coach and pretty much the face of the franchise out there in Oakland. Before they move to Las Vegas. Why? I don't know. I think it's going to be a major disaster for the Raiders. This whole John Gruden experiment, it doesn't work. We see with Mike Shanahan, retread coaches like Mike Shanahan recently with the Redskins. We saw it with Joe Gibbs when the Redskins, again, brought him back from beyond and doesn't look like and I think John Gruden is too far removed from the game. Just like Joe Gibbs and Mike Shanahan looked out to be when they came back both with the Redskins. Shanahan and Gibbs, they won Super Bowls. Gruden's won a Super Bowl. It's different here, different time, different players, different mentalities. And I just think it's a colossal mistake of the Oakland Raiders to have done so with that. Let's turn it into a longer show. I've already been running my mouth for about 48 minutes, but I still got a long time more to go. You don't have to listen to the whole show, but it is the Matt Kwasiborski Show calling you live and direct from a very kind of cloudy, rainy, drizzly Prague, the capital of Czech Republic here in the heart of Central Europe. So going back, we talked about the headliners going into cutdown day. Not very much drama on the Philadelphia Eagles. Basically, the drama is along, will the Eagles keep Wendell Smallwood? Will they keep Josh Adams, the local kid? Will they keep Pumphrey? Will they keep DeAndre Carter? That's pretty much the only drama surrounding the Eagles. It looks like they will keep the greatest story of training camp, Jordan Mailata, the Australian rugby player who never played American football in his life until the Eagles minicamp, the 7th-round draft pick. Looks like not only will he be a contributor or make the active roster, will probably be a contributor at some point this year. And a lot of offensive line experts around the NFL look like they think he might even be Jason Peters Jr. when Jason Peters decides to hang it up. So that's the drama surrounding there. So let's look around the league. Prediction-wise, looking at the Eagles season. So we look at their schedule real fast going in. Like I said, I love the schedule is very easy. Not very easy. Nothing's easy. In the first 4 games, the Falcons obviously are going to be tough with a revenge. We talked about that on their mind coming into the opening night. Then the Eagles go to 3 straight road games. It looks like the Colts game is at home. Sorry. They do it a little bit differently here in Europe. They put the home team in the above situation. So the Eagles' first 4 games are split road, home. Eagles and Falcons at home, on the road at Tampa, home against the Colts, and on the road against the Titans. And that will lead into a Week 5 matchup of the first game in October against the Vikings. I think the Eagles have a strong shot to be 4-0 heading into that Vikings game. A very, very strong chance to be 4-0. I expect them to be 3-2 at the very, very worst. I think the Titans might be able to knock them off, and obviously the Falcons have a definite chance to knock the Eagles off, only because Nick Foles is going to be the starting quarterback most likely and should be. Carson Wentz should be wrapped in bubble wrap. If Carson Wentz is on his way back, I do not bring him back until the Giants game on the road in New York. Because I think the Vikings game, their defense is going to want to come after him. If that's his first game, that's not the team to put him against. Then the Eagles have a stretch of the Vikings, Giants, Panthers, Jaguars. 4 games there that could be very, very difficult. The key to that will be the Giants and the Panthers to see where those two teams, who I think are Jekyll and Hyde franchises. Everyone thinks the Giants are going to be the team to challenge the Eagles. I think that's the case. I don't think they're the team that's going to knock off the Eagles. I think the Eagles win the division, going into the playoffs. But I think the Giants are the biggest threat. I like what they've done against the offensive line and drafting a potential franchise draft in Saquon Barkley. I don't have much faith in their defense, but they have some talented receivers. Signing Odell Beckham this week to a massive contract, which I think is pretty much will prove to be a mistake, but let's see. They got Eric Ingram, a great up-and-coming tight end. They have Saquon Barkley. They have another good wide receiver, losing my name right now on the other outside spot. So I think they have some good skill positions, but their quarterback's 38 years old, and we're going to see what Eli can do against the makeshift offensive line. And the Panthers are always up and down. I think they're going to be a lot worse than what they were because I think their division is strong with the Falcons, the Saints, and also you have while Tampa Bay I think will finish last. They're not a runner. They're not the Tampa Bay Buccaneers of old. That's a guaranteed win. The Eagles go Cowboys, Saints, Giants, Redskins. I think Giants and Saints give the Eagles the biggest challenges there. Then heading into the final quarter, Cowboys again, Rams, Texans, and Redskins. Cowboys, I think, are going to be the worst team in the division this year, and I could see them maybe being 6-10, 7-9 at best in the division. I think the Redskins are around that 7-9 to 9-7 mark, most likely on the ladder. Cowboys, I think, might be 6-10. In that matchup there, you have the Rams. Obviously, it's going to be a really tough game. And then the Texans might be battling out for the playoff spot against the Jacksonville Jaguars there. And I think the Eagles sweep the Redskins and Cowboys and probably split with the Giants this year. Maybe split with the Redskins. Depending, again, the health of Carson Wentz. But I think the Eagles win this division going away. I think they win the division quite easily this year. Like I said, I think they could be either 4-0, and then even if they go 2-2 or in the last quarters, that gives them a 12-8, 12-4 record. I think that's easily to win the division. Do I think I'm getting ahead of myself? Yes and no. I think there's some definite issues that the Eagles have, but depth is not one of them. And depth is the reason why they won the Super Bowl last year. And the aggressive play calling of Doug Peterson. And I expect Doug Peterson to change his playbook, change the RPOs, and also introduce a little bit of the double tight end set with the rookie Dallas Goedert and the great Zach Ertz. Defensively, I think that the front seven has a chance to be the best front seven in the league, especially along the defensive line. I think the cornerbacks have a chance to be the most depth at cornerback they will. So that's why I see that. Moving to the other divisions, Vikings, Green Bay, Detroit, Chicago. I think Chicago is much improved, but not enough to make a playoff run. I think the Vikings with Kirk Cousins, and then you have the Green Bay Packers getting Aaron Rodgers back. Look, I'm going to tell you something about the Vikings. I think the move for Kirk Cousins was the right move. I think it was a great move for Kirk Cousins. I think it was a great move for the Vikings. But Kirk Cousins hasn't done much for the Redskins in terms of key games and also in the playoffs. I'm not even sure if they made the playoffs with Kirk Cousins. If they did, they lost. I think Kirk Cousins, when it comes down to the seasons on the lines, he's he's mediocre. And we'll see if the long-term security with the Vikings gives him a chance to boost his confidence. And he's the face of the franchise, which he was, coming out of college. He was a 4th-round draft pick. But he saved that Redskins franchise from being disastrous. And maybe even stopped the Redskins from getting Carson Wentz, who knows. But the Vikings defense is something that's going to have a major, major chip on their shoulder. They were the number one defense coming into the NFC playoffs last year and the NFC Championship against the Eagles, and they got throttled. They didn't just lose the game 17-14 on a last-second field goal. They lost the game 38-7, but the defense gave up, I think, 31 of those points. They got throttled. They had no answer for the Eagles and the backup quarterback. Remember, Nick Foles was a backup quarterback. Yes, he caught lightning in a bottle, but he's still a backup quarterback last year. Who caught lightning in a bottle. I'm wondering if that loss has psychological impact on that defensive unit. Look, NFL coaches and any coach in any league, but really especially in the NFL, they're very good at making sure that players focus week to week and forget about the last season. And Mike Zimmer is one of the best defensive-minded coaches in the league. And I'm sure he has that team focused and ready to move on and probably being hungry and angry. But I'm still wondering if that game has a psychological effect on the Vikings. Because no matter, even if the Vikings go the number one defense and they get back to the same exact position as they did last year, the NFC Championship game, that the stigma of this year's NFC Championship game will still be on there. The whole time the announcers will be questioning it the entire season. And I'm wondering how that plays. Green Bay, meanwhile, gets back Aaron Rodgers. I love the fact that they added Jimmy Graham at the tight end position and finally gave Aaron Rodgers a real big threat coming out of at the tight end position. And I think they ultimately win the division. I think they'll win the division by a game over the Minnesota Vikings. So I think the Vikings make the playoffs. The NFC South, I think the biggest competition for the Eagles are the New Orleans Saints. Again, the New Orleans Saints, like the Atlanta Falcons, lost pretty much at the last second. They lost on a miraculous play where Minnesota's Case Keenum found Trey Diggs. Trey Diggs of the Vikings for a miraculous pass last second. I think the Saints cornerbacks came in. The first safety and quarterback tried to make the interception. They missed. Stephon Diggs makes the touchdown. That's his name, Stephon. That NFC Championship could have been easily Atlanta and New Orleans, and I think that's the best division in the NFL, top to bottom, is the NFC South. And I think the Saints will win that division this year. You have Drew Brees, who really he also looked like he resurrected his career a bit. Some people were saying he's kind of shot. They have a massive, wonderful wide receiver, Michael Thomas. They got a budding star in Alvin Kamara coming out of the backfield, and Mark Ingram's career was vitalized by the dual backfield thing where they didn't have to rely on him too much. So I think the Saints will win that division with the Falcons getting the other wild card. Then coming out of the AFC West, the much improved San Francisco 49ers. You have the Seattle Seahawks, who pretty much will be on it's their rebuilding year. Arizona, they get a new potential franchise quarterback, a new head coach. They put new blood in there. But I think the 49ers could be the class of that division. Who am I forgetting about in that division? The Rams. Oh, sorry, the Rams. How do you forget about the Rams, who I think still are a shade under the Eagles and the Saints in terms of offensive production? I think Jared Goff looks like a franchise quarterback. Todd Gurley's probably the best overall running back in the NFC, if not the whole NFL. I like the addition of Brandon Cooks. But there's something just missing from the Rams. I don't know if it's a toughness or a softness. They went out and took a major gamble on their defense, and I think it's a gamble that's going to pay off, but also has the potential to blow up in their faces. They went out and traded for arguably two of the best cornerbacks in the NFL, Marcus Peters of the Kansas City Chiefs and Aqib Talib, formerly of the Denver Broncos. Aqib Talib played in the Super Bowl. Marcus Peters was considered the best cornerback in the AFC last year. Yet the Kansas City Chiefs didn't want him, so they traded him to the Los Angeles Rams. When you can't play for Andy Reid, or if Andy Reid wants to get rid of you, that's tough. Andy Reid has a lot of tolerance. He has to handle so many things from Donovan, the T.O. controversy, the unfortunate passing of his son during training camp. Deshaun Jackson was a major headache in that locker room, and of course the Mike Vick situation. And everyone loves Andy Reid to play for him. And if you can't play for him, it's really says something about your character. And I think Peters going to the Rams, he'll have a chip on his shoulder. He'll play with Wade Phillips, who I think is one of the best defensive coordinators of all time. Everywhere he goes, the defenses just get better. Aqib Talib is another little head case out there, and also slowing down a little bit, but we'll see how they do. But they also signed Dominic Sue, and to put him on the line with Aaron Donald, who signed a massive $135 million, but more importantly, $87 million guaranteed contract yesterday or 2 days ago with the Rams, who's considered the best defensive lineman probably in the NFC, just a shade ahead of Fletcher Cox there, or defensive tackle. That could be a major disruptive force. Those two could shut run game. The idea I think the Rams have is those two, Donald and Sue on the defensive line, will shut down the running game, and then the outside cornerbacks will shut down the passing game. So we'll see how that experiment goes on the defense. But I think the Rams, yeah, they'll win that division. And San Francisco, I think, will be battling the likes of Atlanta or New Orleans for the wild card spot, with Arizona and Seattle pulling up the rear. That's what I see over there in the NFC. So let's put it forward. Eagles, NFC East. I have Green Bay, NFC North. Saints, NFC South. And I have the Rams, NFC West, with the Falcons and the Vikings getting the wild card positions. Doesn't really change much from last year, I guess, in terms of, I think the wild card was slightly different last year. I think the Saints-Falcons played the wild card game. No, the Saints and Vikings played the game. Falcons, I forget who they beat. Oh, they beat the Rams. And then the Eagles won the championship, had the first round bye. In the AFC, real quickly, AFC East, the Patriots are still king, but I love the fact that Jets, the Jets, Jets, I think they have the Rookie of the Year in Sam Darnold as their starting quarterback, the rookie who fell all the way to number 3. Quite surprisingly, in my position, I thought he'd be the first or second player off the draft board. I think he helps the Jets there. Buffalo and Miami are just stuck in mediocrity, if not worse. I don't see those teams moving forward, especially now the Bills are be starting their rookie quarterback, Josh Allen, who they drafted, I think, 7th or 12th overall, but is not considered a franchise quarterback. AFC South will be interesting. You have Jacksonville Jaguars pretty much winning that division, but with a healthy Deshaun Watson, the Houston Texans will be a major player for that division, especially the key to that team is not only the health of Deshaun Watson, but also the health of J.J. Watt, if he can get that defense back to where he was and being player of the year. You have Tennessee, mediocre Tennessee, and the Colts, I think, are worse even than Tennessee, only because I think the Colts defense is pretty horrendous, even though they get Andrew Luck back. AFC North, what do you say about that division? Pittsburgh, I guess, is still the class of that division. When you have Ben Roethlisberger, Antonio Brown, Le'Veon Bell, those explosive players, you have to say that. They're always a defensive-minded team. But, when their quarterback's constantly contemplating retirement each year, you wonder how much Big Ben has it in him to lead that team. AFC South or West, I think you have Kansas City wins that division. And I think Oakland takes a step backwards with John Gruden, especially if they trade Khalil Mack and they have no running game. I think Denver could be slightly improved with Case Keenum at quarterback, a guy who's, he's a journeyman quarterback, but he had a lot of success last year with Minnesota. If you put him around a good offensive line, he's good. He goes out and he'll win you some games for you. He's not going to win you a Super Bowl, I don't think, but he's a guy who can win you some games. And then you have, Kansas City, Oakland, Denver, and not Seattle, San Diego. Another team that I love, that San Diego Superchargers, best uniforms in football, the Powder Blues. They could be a team on the rise. If they can keep everyone healthy, especially on offense, they could challenge Kansas City for the division. They might actually win the division. I kind of forgot about them sitting out there with Phillip Rivers against Pat Mahomes, the second-year quarterback starting for Kansas City, who's been inconsistent for the Kansas City Chiefs. But I like the addition of Sammy Watkins in Kansas City. And, of course, you have Tyreek Hill, Tyrone Hill, and Kareem Hunt out there in Kansas City. They could be a really good team as well. I think if you have the Patriots. I'm going to take the Patriots. I will take the Jaguars slightly over Texas, because even though Deshaun Watson got hurt, he didn't play a full season. So I kind of want to see him put a full season of work and see how he adjusts. I think the Steelers run away with the North, and I'll give the nod to San Diego. And I think your wild cards coming out probably will be Houston and Kansas City coming out of there. So that's the way I see the NFL shaping up this year. It's been an hour and almost 4 minutes here on the Matt Kwasiborski Show, talking all about the NFL. But let's go a little bit A little bit longer talking about my favorite baseball team, the team that's sitting 2 games back of the Atlanta Braves, the Philadelphia Phillies. A Phillies team that I think, unless the bottom completely falls out and the record is under 500 this season has been a major enjoyment, a major surprise. They have a very controversial manager in Gabe Kapler, who right now I think is the front runner, probably the front runner for manager of the year, along with the Atlanta manager who's also in his first year. I forget his name. Mickey Callaway's in New York. I forget the Atlanta Braves manager's name, but that guy has them in first place. The Phillies, and the much disappointing Washington Nationals, a team that was favored to win the division and maybe even win the World Series this year, as in a sell mode. They look like they're going to enter a rebuild. I think they're resigned to the fact that they're not going to be able to sign Bryce Harper. I think they look at they're either trying to clear massive space for Harper or they're preparing for his eventual exit, because they've traded a lot of veteran guys, trading Gio Gonzalez yesterday. They've traded the second baseman Daniel Murphy. They traded some key bullpen pieces, and a little bit of a sell-off for them. I think the trade of Gio Gonzalez says a lot for them. They still have a great starter, Max Scherzer. Steven Strasburg isn't what he used to be, but he's still very effective. And they have some key young pieces, as every team does at this time of year. Anthony Rendon, Trey Turner, to build around. But they just don't seem to be they seem to be resigned to the fact that Bryce Harper might be signing somewhere else next year. The Mets and the Marlins, they're kind of, the Mets are the Mets and the Marlins are the Marlins. What are you going to say? But the Phillies have been a very pleasant surprise. And you look at this team, and you look at the unorthodox managing style of Gabe Kapler, and they're right there in it. They're right there in the wild card hunt. They're right there in the division hunt. They have a chance to be in first place by the end of next week. Actually, we'll be going back to the United States on September 12th. I think the Phillies could be in first place by then, because Atlanta Braves schedule gets a lot tougher, and then the Phillies schedule gets a little bit easier after a rough stretch. And it was really after June where the Phillies went something like 16-17 in the month of June, or something, or 14-15. That's pretty much a little bit more accurate. And June was supposed to be the telling month, and they had played really well going into June. And then in June, they played really, really well and kept this team in contention. How they're doing it, who knows? Outside of Aaron Nola, they have not had a consistent starting rotation. I think the most consistent starter has been Vince Velasquez, and I think every starter has an ERA well over 4. Their bullpen is very inexperienced and much maligned. They can't seem to find a consistent closer who can close out key games, not just any game, but key games. Their offense has been pretty putrid outside of Maikel Franco, who seemed to resurrect his career after benching and trade rumors this year, and the Phillies trying to go after Manny Machado. They've made some solid additions at the trade deadline, but nothing major. They got Cabrera, I can't pronounce his first name, Asubal Cabrera, the walk-off home run last night. And even though that guy hasn't hit too much and is a liability in the field, he's come up with some key hits. They get the former Nationals all-star catcher Wilson Ramos from the Tampa Bay Rays. He's proven that he provides slightly better defensive catcher stability behind the plate, and has come up with some key hits in games. They've traded for some depth, getting some key bullpen pieces, and the Marlins, they got Jose Bautista from the Mets as well, and they also picked up someone named Justin Hoob from the Marlins, who actually got hurt pretty quickly into the Phillies season. But they're right there. They're right there. They beat the Cubs, the first place Chicago Cubs last night, 2-1. And they really have to start winning series. They're in a rough stretch right now. They have not won a series dating back to August. I think obviously we're in September now, but dating back to early August when they swept the Marlins in the beginning of the month. They've lost every series since, yet they're still 2 games out. They were as much as 4.5 games out earlier this week. They picked up 2.5 games on the Braves. And, they played the Braves, I think, 7 out of the 11 games. Those last 11 games are going to be the season, and that's what's going to make it fun to be a Philadelphia Phillies fan. I don't think they're going to completely drop off the tables before those last 11 games, because they also go to Colorado to play them in a 4-game series, and they're battling Colorado for the wild card spot. It's been a fun ride for the Phillies, and Philadelphia sports radio I listened to this year, they're all writing the Phillies off when they're 4.5 games out, and they lost a game, a couple of games this week that were just, they lost 2 games this week that said it'd be the worst losses in the season. One against the Toronto Blue Jays on Sunday, and then against the Nationals at home, even though they're the best home team in baseball. But anyway, long story short, it's been a very, very fun season for the Phillies. If they completely drop off in September, then you can kind of say, that's what we expected, because everyone's going to look at their season and be like, they're a 65-win team last year. This year they're at 72 and 62. If they get to 81 and 81, it's a 16-game improvement. 16 game improvement, but still they have a lot of bright future. And it reminds me a lot of the Philadelphia Eagles under Doug Peterson the first year. A lot of people were questioning if Peterson was a longtime coach. I'm not saying the Phillies are going to go out and win the World Series next year. They will be a major player in the free agent market. You will have to see. It'll be interesting to see with Harper and Machado. A lot of people speculate that they will be major players for both of them. And it would be interesting to see if they could pull off a Harper and Machado signings. They still have to worry about their pitching, and that's the other thing that the Phillies have seemed to be emphasized. Even before Matt Klentak, the young general manager, they still were emphasizing pitching under Ruben Amaro. You haven't seen that philosophy change much. And right now they have Aaron Nola, who looks like he'll at least finish, I think, second or no worse than third in the Cy Young, and is also an MVP candidate. But after that, Eflin, was the guy. Zach Eflin's mediocre. Jake Arrieta is the end of his career. Nick Pivetta, mediocre. Vince Velasquez could develop into a solid number 3 starter at best. And then the bullpen, they need some key pieces to come through there at some point. That's the future there. So I'm not sure if you sell the market for Harper and Machado. To be honest, I'm not sure what Machado is going to do because he's out in L.A. How do you leave Baltimore for the bright lights of Los Angeles, especially a team that's always in contention with the management structure, with my former best friend's roommates, Andrew Friedman, leading the charge out there in LA front office. How you could really not want to play in LA. So I think that's going to be interesting. And you also have to look at the Yankees for Harper as well. The Yankees also always are major players in the free agent market. I'm not a big fan of Bryce Harper. I'm just not. I think he's a hothead. I think he's detrimental in clubhouses, and I'm not quite sure he's going to live up to his potential. Former National League player, MVP, don't get me a doubt, he's got all the potential in the world. I'm just not sure. He's had an awful year this year. He doesn't have a strong year last year, and he'll always be a threat, but I'm not sure I have a feeling he may have peaked already at the end of his career, so we'll see about that. It's been a long show today. It's well over an hour. We're into our hour and 13th minute here, but I think I'm at the end of the show. I appreciate all my loyal listeners. I appreciate Al Gore for inventing the internet, and I appreciate Spreaker Radio. And remember to inspire the inspiration. Don't wait for the inspiration to inspire you. Have a great day, everybody. Goodbye.